The crack of the auctioneer's gavel sent a chill through the dusty square of Sweetwater, Texas, as Rebecca Hayes stood trembling on the auction block, her auburn hair matted against her tear-streaked face, while the crowd of men shouted numbers that would determine her fate in the unforgiving year of 1875. Rebecca had never imagined she'd find herself being sold to the highest bidder like livestock. But after her father's death left behind substantial debts, the creditors had seized everything, including her, as an indentured servant to cover the remaining sum. The June heat beat down mercilessly on her bare head as she clutched the tattered remains of her once fine dress, trying to maintain what little dignity remained to her. She kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to make eye contact with the leering faces below. "$500 for the woman," shouted a bearded man with whiskey on his breath, his eyes roving over her in a way that made Rebecca's stomach turn. "$600, called another, a cattle baron known for his cruelty to workers. The auctioneer, a thin man with a waxed mustache, smiled coldly. "Do I hear $700 for this fine, educated lady? Can cook, clean, and reads better than half the men here." In the back of the crowd, Jackson Alderman shifted uncomfortably. The 30-year-old rancher had only come to town for supplies, not expecting to witness something that turned his stomach. Slavery had been abolished years ago, but here in the remote corners of Texas, debt servitude operated in much the same way. He'd heard rumors of these auctions, but had never seen one firsthand. "$700, shouted the cattle baron, followed by scattered bids reaching $800. Jackson studied the woman's face, her proud bearing despite her circumstances, the fierce intelligence behind her fear. Something about her stirred something deep within him. He thought of the money in his pocket, the entire sum he'd saved over 5 long years of brutal work to expand his modest ranch. Every penny had been earmarked for new breeding stock that would secure his future. $850 going once, called the auctioneer. Without fully understanding his own actions, Jackson pushed to the front of the crowd. $1,500, he shouted. A hush fell over the crowd. The cattle baron turned, his face reddening with anger. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $1,500 from Mr. Alderman. "Do I hear $1,600? The crowd murmured. The cattle baron scowled but shook his head even for him. That price was too steep for an indentured servant. Going once, going twice. Sold to Jackson Alderman for $1,500. Rebecca's eyes met Jackson's for the first time, a mixture of relief and apprehension crossing her features. She didn't know this man, but anything seemed better than the fate that had awaited her with the cattle baron. Jackson approached the auction block, his heart hammering. He'd just spent his entire savings, throwing away years of plans on an impulsive decision. As he handed over the money to the auctioneer, he wondered if he'd lost his mind. The clerk handed him papers stating his legal ownership of Rebecca Hayes's debt contract for 3 years. Jackson folded them without reading and tucked them into his pocket. He approached Rebecca, who flinched slightly as he neared. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, tipping his hat. "I'm Jackson Alderman. My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from town. You'll have your own quarters there." Rebecca studied him cautiously. "Why did you buy my contract, Mr. Alderman?" Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "Nobody deserves to be sold like cattle. I couldn't watch it happen." "And what will you expect of me?" she asked directly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cooking would be helpful," he admitted. "But mostly I need help with bookkeeping for the ranch. Can you handle figures?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Yes, I was a teacher before my father's death." "Good," Jackson nodded. "We should get moving if we want to reach the ranch before dark." He helped her down from the auction block, aware of the stares from the townspeople. Some looked disapproving, others curious. Jackson ignored them all as he led Rebecca to where his horse was hitched. "I didn't bring the wagon today," he said apologetically. "You'll have to ride with me." Rebecca nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable but with no choice in the matter. Jackson helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. He was acutely aware of how improper this looked, but there was no alternative. As they rode out of Sweetwater, he kept a respectful distance, holding the reins on either side of her rather than placing his arms around her. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Rebecca spoke. "My father was a good man," she said suddenly. "He invested in a silver mine that failed. He never meant to leave me with his debts." Jackson nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss. He died 6 months ago. The creditors gave me time to sell our home and belongings, but it wasn't enough." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "When they came to take me, I considered running, but where would I go?" "The West isn't kind to women alone," Jackson agreed. "No place is," Rebecca replied. As they crested a hill, Jackson's ranch came into view, a modest spread with a small main house, a barn, and a bunkhouse. It wasn't much compared to the cattle barons' empires, but Jackson had built it himself from nothing after arriving in Texas with just the clothes on his back 10 years earlier. "That's Whispering Pines," he said, nodding toward the ranch. "It's not much, but it's home." Rebecca took in the neat fences and well-maintained buildings. "You live there alone?" With 2 ranch hands, Miguel and Elijah, "they stay in the bunkhouse. You'll have the spare room in the main house." Rebecca stiffened. "Mr. Alderman, I should make it clear that I won't. It's not like that," Jackson interrupted quickly. "The room has a lock on the door. You'll be safe, I promise." She didn't respond, but Jackson felt her shoulders relax slightly. As they approached the ranch, a dog came bounding out to greet them, a black and white border collie who barked excitedly. "That's Scout," Jackson said. "Best cattle dog in the county." For the first time, Rebecca smiled slightly as the dog circled their horse. The expression transformed her face, and Jackson found himself hoping he'd see more of those smiles. Miguel, a Mexican man in his 40s, appeared from the barn as they arrived. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Rebecca, but he made no comment. "Miguel, this is Miss Hayes," Jackson said as he dismounted. "She'll be helping with the cooking and bookkeeping." Miguel nodded respectfully. "Welcome to Whispering Pines, Miss Hayes." Jackson helped Rebecca down from the horse, then turned to Miguel. "Is everything all right with the herd?" "She, patron," but Elijah rode out to the north pasture, their sign of rustlers again. Jackson frowned. "The Dawson gang," Miguel nodded grimly. "Probably. They took 2 calves from the Hansons' place yesterday." Rebecca listened to this exchange with growing concern. She'd heard of the Dawson gang, ruthless cattle thieves who didn't hesitate to kill anyone who stood in their way. Jackson turned to her. "Let me show you to your room. You must be exhausted." The main house was simple but clean. A large kitchen and living area dominated the ground floor, with a staircase leading to 2 bedrooms upstairs. Jackson led Rebecca to the smaller of the 2 rooms. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours for as long as you're here." The room contained a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the ranch, offering a view of the rolling hills beyond. It was plain but comfortable. "There's a lock," Jackson pointed out, showing her the bolt on the inside of the door. "No one will enter without your permission." Rebecca nodded, still wary but somewhat reassured. "Thank you. I'll give you some time to rest. There are some clothes in the dresser. They belonged to my sister when she visited last year. They might fit you." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You have a sister?" Jackson nodded. "Sarah lives in Austin with her husband. She visits occasionally." He hesitated. "There's a washroom at the end of the hall if you'd like to clean up. Dinner is at sundown, After he left, Rebecca sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She was grateful not to have ended up with the cattle baron or the bearded man, but her situation remained precarious. She was still legally bound to this stranger for 3 years. She opened the dresser and found several simple dresses, a nightgown, and undergarments. After gathering what she needed, she made her way to the washroom and gratefully scrubbed away the dirt and sweat of the auction block. The warm water soothed her frayed nerves, and by the time she changed into one of the clean dresses, a simple blue cotton that was only slightly too large, she felt marginally better. When she descended the stairs at sundown, she found Jackson in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to prepare a meal. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted. "Usually the men and I take turns, but none of us has much skill." Rebecca surveyed the kitchen. It was well stocked but disorganized. "I can cook," she offered. "If you don't mind." Jackson stepped aside gratefully. "Please." Rebecca set to work, finding a rhythm in the familiar tasks. She prepared a simple but satisfying meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. When Miguel and Elijah, a weathered man in his 30s with a perpetual squint, came in from their work, they eyed the food with appreciation. "This is the best meal we've had in months," Elijah declared after his first bite. "Maybe years," Miguel agreed. Jackson watched Rebecca as she ate quietly, acknowledging the compliments with small nods. There was a dignity to her that the day's humiliations hadn't erased. He wondered about her life before her father's death, the woman she had been when she wasn't bound by debt and necessity. After dinner, when the hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Jackson approached Rebecca as she washed the dishes. "You don't have to do everything," he said. "We all share the work here." "I prefer to keep busy," she replied. "It helps me think." Jackson leaned against the counter. "Miss Hayes, I want to be clear about something. I know what it looked like today in town, a man buying a woman at auction, but that's not what happened, not really." Rebecca's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Isn't it? You own my debt contract." "I do," he acknowledged, "but I don't intend to hold you to it." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're free to leave whenever you wish. I won't stop you." He ran a hand through his hair. "Though I hope you'll stay, at least for a while. I could use the help, and it's not safe for a woman alone out here." Rebecca studied him, trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. "Why would you spend your savings just to let me go?" Jackson was quiet for a moment. "I've seen what happens to people trapped in situations they can't escape. My mother was indentured when I was a boy. The man who held her contract worked her to death." His voice hardened. "I won't be that kind of man." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "My reputation in Sweetwater is ruined simply by being put up for auction." "Then stay," Jackson said. "Work for fair wages that will count against your debt. When it's paid, you can decide what you want to do next." "Fair wages," Rebecca repeated as if testing the concept. "And how long would it take to pay off $1,500 that way?" "Longer than 3 years," Jackson admitted. "But you'd be earning your freedom, not having it handed to you when I decide your time is up." Rebecca considered this. There was something appealing about earning her way out of debt rather than serving a sentence determined by others. "I'll stay," she decided. "For now." Jackson nodded, relief evident on his face. "Good. We'll work out the details tomorrow." As Rebecca climbed the stairs to her room that night, she felt something she hadn't expected, a small measure of hope. Jackson Alderman was a mystery to her, but he'd shown more decency in one day than she'd experienced in the 6 months since her father's death. She locked her door out of habit rather than fear and gazed out the window at the star-filled Texas sky. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to wonder if there might be a future worth looking forward to. The next morning, Rebecca woke at dawn, accustomed to early rising. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find Jackson already up, brewing coffee on the stove. "You're an early riser," he commented, pouring her a cup. "A teacher's habit," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I thought we could go over the books today," Jackson said. "They're in a state of disarray, I'm afraid. I'm better with cattle than numbers." After breakfast, Jackson led Rebecca to a small office off the main room. A desk overflowed with papers, receipts, and ledgers in various states of organization. "This is extensive," Rebecca said diplomatically. Jackson chuckled. "It's a mess. I started with good intentions, but—" He shrugged. Rebecca sat at the desk and began sorting through the papers. "I'll need some time to make sense of this." "Take all the time you need. I'll be checking the north pasture with Elijah today. Miguel will be around if you need anything." Left alone, Rebecca immersed herself in bringing order to the financial chaos. By midday, she'd sorted the papers by type and year and had begun reconstructing the ranch's financial history. What emerged surprised her. Jackson's operation was small but profitable, with careful management of resources and steady growth over the years. He wasn't wealthy, but he was far from struggling, which made his impulsive bid for her contract all the more puzzling. The $1,500 represented a significant portion of his liquid assets, according to the ledgers. When Jackson returned that evening, dusty and tired from a day of riding, Rebecca had prepared dinner and organized the office into something manageable. "This smells amazing," he said, washing his hands at the pump outside before entering the kitchen. "Just a simple stew," Rebecca replied. "I found some vegetables in the root cellar." Over dinner, Rebecca explained what she'd discovered in the books. "You've been doing well," she said. "But you could do better with more organized record keeping. I've started a new system that should make it easier." Jackson listened attentively, impressed by her quick grasp of his financial situation. "You have quite a head for business, Miss Hayes." "Rebecca," she said suddenly. "If we're to work together, you should call me Rebecca." Jackson smiled. "Rebecca, then, and I'm Jackson." As the evening wore on, Rebecca found herself genuinely enjoying Jackson's company. He was thoughtful and articulate, with a dry wit that occasionally surfaced in his conversation. When he spoke of his ranch, his passion was evident. "I came to Texas with nothing," he told her as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset. "Worked as a hand on the biggest spreads until I saved enough to buy this land. It was nothing then, overgrazed and neglected. But I saw what it could be." "And now," Rebecca prompted. "Now it's home," he said simply. "Not the biggest or the grandest, but it's mine. Every fence post, every head of cattle, every patch of grazing land, I earned it all." Rebecca understood then why he'd been so reckless with his savings. A man who had built everything from nothing would understand the value of freedom better than most. The days fell into a pattern. Rebecca cooked and kept the books, gradually implementing systems that made the ranch's operations more efficient. Jackson and his hands tended the cattle and maintained the property. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, talking as the stars emerged overhead. Rebecca learned that Jackson had lost his father in the Civil War and had been raised by his mother until her death when he was 16. He'd worked his way west, taking whatever jobs he could find until he discovered his affinity for ranching. In turn, she told him about her life in Philadelphia, where her father had been a professor before moving to Texas for what he'd believed would be a profitable business venture. She'd taught at the local school in Sweetwater for 2 years before her father's death upended her life. "I miss teaching," she admitted one evening. "Watching a child's face when understanding dawns, there's nothing quite like it." "There's a school in Sweetwater," Jackson said. "Do they have a teacher now?" Rebecca shook her head. Not since I left. The town council was trying to find a replacement. Perhaps they still need one, Jackson suggested. The idea took root in Rebecca's mind. Teaching again would give her purpose beyond the ranch and allow her to earn additional money toward her debt. A week later, Jackson drove her into Sweetwater in his wagon. People stared as they passed, and Rebecca held her head high despite her discomfort. The auction had been a public humiliation that the townsfolk wouldn't soon forget. At the schoolhouse, they met with Mr. Peterson, head of the town council. His eyebrows rose when he saw Rebecca. "Miss Hayes," he said stiffly, "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "Mr. Peterson," Rebecca replied, "I understand the school remains without a teacher." "It does," he admitted reluctantly. "I would like to apply for the position." Mr. Peterson glanced at Jackson. "Mr. Alderman, as holder of Miss Hayes's debt contract, you would need to—" "Miss Hayes speaks for herself," Jackson interrupted. "Her contract with me allows her to seek additional employment." Mr. Peterson frowned. "The parents might object to a qualified teacher who taught their children successfully for 2 years." Jackson asked mildly, though Rebecca could hear the steel beneath his words. After some negotiation, it was agreed that Rebecca would teach 3 days a week, with her salary paid directly to her rather than to Jackson as her contract holder, an arrangement that raised Mr. Peterson's eyebrows, but which he ultimately accepted. As they left the schoolhouse, Rebecca turned to Jackson. "Thank you for supporting me. You're a teacher," he said simply. "The children need you." Rebecca's return to teaching brought a new dimension to her life at Whispering Pines. On teaching days, Jackson would drive her into town early and pick her up in the afternoon. The children welcomed her back enthusiastically, and gradually, some of the parents' initial hesitation faded as they remembered her competence and dedication. At the ranch, Rebecca's presence brought changes beyond organized books. The main house, once merely functional, became a home. She planted flowers along the walkway, hung curtains she'd sewn herself, and filled the rooms with small touches that made the space more welcoming. Jackson found himself looking forward to returning home each evening, knowing Rebecca would be there. He caught himself watching her as she worked, the graceful way she moved, the concentration on her face as she read, the rare but dazzling smile that transformed her features when something amused her. On Sundays, when no work was done beyond essential chores, they often rode together, Jackson showing her the boundaries of his land. Rebecca proved to be a capable horsewoman, and these rides became highlights of their week. During one such ride in late July, a sudden thunderstorm caught them far from the ranch house. Racing for shelter, they found an abandoned line shack Jackson kept stocked with basic supplies for emergencies. As rain pounded the roof, they built a small fire in the shack stove and dried their sodden clothes as best they could. "We might be here a while," Jackson said, looking out at the darkening sky. "These summer storms can last for hours." Rebecca nodded, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The small space felt intimate with just the two of them, away from the ranch and its daily routines. For the first time, she was acutely aware of Jackson as a man rather than as her employer or benefactor. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said impulsively, wanting to break the growing tension. Jackson considered the question. "I can't swim," he admitted finally. "Grew up in Kansas, miles from any water deep enough to swim in. Never learned." Rebecca laughed. "That's your secret." "I expected something more scandalous from a rugged rancher." "Your turn," he challenged, smiling. Rebecca hesitated. "I write poetry," she said finally. "Not good poetry, mind you, but I fill notebooks with it." "I'd like to read it sometime," Jackson said. "No one's ever read it," she replied. "It's too personal." The rain continued to fall as they talked, sharing small confidences that gradually built a bridge between them. When Jackson added wood to the fire, his hand brushed Rebecca's and neither pulled away immediately. The contact, brief as it was, left Rebecca's skin tingling. As darkness fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Jackson prepared a simple meal from the shack's provisions. They ate by firelight, their conversation flowing easily now. "We'll have to stay the night," Jackson said eventually. "It's too dangerous to ride back in the dark, especially with the ground this wet." Rebecca nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness at the thought of spending the night alone with him. "I understand." Jackson made a pallet by the fire. "You take the cot," he said, nodding toward the narrow bed in the corner. "I'll sleep here." Rebecca wanted to protest that he was too tall to sleep comfortably on the floor, but she recognized the propriety he was trying to maintain. "Thank you." As she lay on the cot that night, listening to the rain and Jackson's steady breathing, Rebecca confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with him. It had happened so gradually she hadn't noticed until now, but there was no denying the warmth that filled her whenever he was near, the way she looked for him first when entering a room, the dreams that featured his face more and more frequently. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Her position was still one of dependence, despite Jackson's insistence on treating her as an equal. What future could there be for them while her debt contract stood between them? The next morning dawned clear and bright. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, though Rebecca felt a new awareness between them as if something had shifted during the storm. When they arrived, they found Miguel waiting anxiously. "Patron, we were worried when you didn't return. The storm caught us," Jackson explained. "We took shelter in the North Line shack." Miguel nodded, though Rebecca caught the speculative look he cast between them. "There's news," he said. "The Dawson gang hit the Frederick's place last night, stole 20 head and shot Mr. Frederick when he tried to stop them." Jackson's expression hardened. "Is he alive?" "Barely. The doctor's with him now." "I need to ride into town," Jackson decided. "The ranchers need to organize before Dawson hits another spread." Rebecca watched him ride away with a sense of foreboding. The Dawson gang was notorious throughout the county, and their attacks were growing bolder. She spent the day in a state of distraction, worrying about Jackson's safety. He returned late that evening, his expression grim. "The ranchers are forming a posse," he said as they sat at the kitchen table. "Fredericks died this afternoon, left a wife and 3 children." "You're joining them," Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. Jackson nodded. "We ride at dawn. Dawson needs to be stopped before anyone else dies." Rebecca wanted to beg him not to go, to remind him that he was a rancher, not a lawman. But she saw the determination in his eyes and knew nothing would change his mind. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said instead. Jackson met her gaze. "I promise." In the early light of dawn, Rebecca stood on the porch as Jackson prepared to leave. Elijah would be riding with him, while Miguel stayed behind to protect the ranch. "I'll be back in a few days," Jackson told her, checking his saddlebags one last time. Rebecca nodded, fighting back tears. "Jackson, she began, then stopped herself. This wasn't the time for confessions. Jackson seemed to understand what she couldn't say. He stepped closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. "I know," he said softly. "Me too." Then he was mounting his horse and riding away, Elijah at his side. Rebecca watched until they disappeared over the hill, her heart heavy with words unspoken. The days of Jackson's absence were the longest of Rebecca's life. She taught her classes mechanically, her mind constantly wandering to thoughts of him facing danger. At the ranch, she threw herself into work, taking on extra chores to keep busy, On the evening of the third day, she sat on the porch with Miguel, watching the road for any sign of riders. "He is a good man," Miguel said suddenly. "The best I have worked for." "Yes, he is," Rebecca agreed. "He looks at you the way my father looked at my mother," Miguel continued. "Like you are the sun and he is lucky to feel your warmth." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. "I'm still bound by my contract," Miguel shrugged. "Papers are just papers. What is between two people that is real?" Before Rebecca could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. She stood quickly, straining to see in the fading light. A single rider appeared, Elijah, riding hard. Rebecca's heart dropped. Where was Jackson? Elijah reined in sharply. "Miss Hayes, Miguel Jackson's been shot." Rebecca felt the world tilt. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "Alive," Elijah assured her quickly, "but hurt bad. They've got him at Doc Wilson's in town. The posse caught up with Dawson at the old Hayes silver mine. There was a shootout." "The silver mine," Rebecca repeated, stunned. Her father's failed mine had been abandoned since his death. Dawson was using it as a hideout, Elijah explained. Jackson took a bullet in the shoulder, but he got Dawson, shot him dead. Miguel was already saddling horses. "We go now," he said firmly. The ride to Sweetwater was a blur for Rebecca. They reached Dr. Wilson's house just as night fell completely. The doctor, a gruff man in his 60s, met them at the door. "He's stable," he told them before Rebecca could ask. "Bullet went clean through his shoulder. He lost blood, but he's young and strong." "Can I see him?" Rebecca asked. Dr. Wilson nodded. "He's been asking for you. Just keep it brief. He needs rest." Jackson lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but his eyes alert. He smiled weakly when Rebecca entered. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he murmured. Rebecca rushed to his side, taking his hand. "You promised to be careful," she scolded, tears finally spilling over. "I was," he protested. "But Dawson was a better shot than I expected." Rebecca wiped her eyes. "Elijah said it happened at my father's mine." Jackson nodded. "Dawson had been using it as a hideout for months. That's where they were taking all the stolen cattle before moving them south to sell." "My father would have hated that," Rebecca said. "Well, they won't be using it anymore," Jackson assured her. "The sheriff's got the rest of the gang locked up." Dr. Wilson returned, insisting that Jackson needed rest. Rebecca reluctantly prepared to leave, but Jackson held onto her hand. "Stay in town tonight," he said. "Mrs. Wilson has rooms for rent upstairs. I should be able to travel back to the ranch tomorrow." Rebecca nodded. "I'll be here when you wake up." The next day, Dr. Wilson declared Jackson fit enough to return home, though he would need several weeks of rest to fully recover. Rebecca and Miguel helped him into the wagon, making him as comfortable as possible for the journey. At the ranch, Rebecca insisted that Jackson take her room, which was larger and had better light than his own. "I'll sleep in yours until you're recovered," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. The following weeks established a new rhythm to their days. Rebecca tended Jackson's wound, changing bandages and applying the poultices Dr. Wilson had prescribed. She read to him in the evenings novels she borrowed from the small lending library in Sweetwater. Poetry she loved, even passages from her teaching materials that she thought might interest him. For his part, Jackson proved to be a surprisingly good patient, rarely complaining despite obvious discomfort. Their conversations grew deeper, ranging from philosophy to politics to personal dreams. "What will you do when your debt is paid?" Jackson asked one evening as they sat on the porch. His recovery was progressing well, and he could now move his arm with only minimal pain. Rebecca considered the question. "I'm not sure anymore. Before, I thought I'd try to go back east, perhaps find a teaching position in a city. And now?" She looked out at the land stretching before them, painted gold by the setting sun. "Now I can't imagine leaving Texas," she said softly. "Or this place." Jackson's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I'm glad to hear that." As summer gave way to fall, Jackson regained his strength. Rebecca continued teaching at the school, but increasingly her heart was at Whispering Pines. The ranch had become home in a way no place had been since her father's death. One crisp October afternoon, Rebecca returned from school to find Jackson waiting for her with the wagon. "I have something to show you," he said mysteriously. He drove them to a part of the property she hadn't visited before, a gentle slope overlooking a small creek, shaded by old oak trees. "What do you think of this spot?" he asked as they stood beneath the trees. "It's beautiful," Rebecca replied truthfully. "Peaceful," Jackson nodded. "I thought it might be a good place for a house." Rebecca looked at him in confusion. "But you already have a house." "A bigger house," he clarified, "with more rooms, for a family." Rebecca's heart began to race as she realized what he was saying. "Jackson," he turned to face her fully. "Rebecca, these past months have been the happiest of my life, despite everything we've faced. You've brought something to Whispering Pines that was missing. You've made it a home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document, handing it to her. Rebecca opened it with trembling fingers. It was her debt contract, marked paid in full with Jackson's signature. "I don't understand," she said. "It's only been 4 months. I'm releasing you from the contract," Jackson explained. "You're free, Rebecca, free to stay or go as you choose." Tears filled her eyes. "Why now?" "Because I want what happens next to be your choice, not your obligation." He took her hands in his. "Rebecca Hayes, I love you. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that auction block, trying so hard to be brave. I want to build a life with you if that's what you want too." Rebecca felt joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "You're sure?" "Even though I have nothing to bring to a marriage, no dowry, no family connections, you bring yourself," Jackson interrupted. "That's all I've ever wanted." Rebecca launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him off balance. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes to everything." Their kiss was sweet and tender at first, then deepening with the passion they'd held in check for months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "Does this mean you'll marry me?" Jackson asked, suddenly realizing he hadn't actually proposed. Rebecca laughed. "Yes, Jackson Alderman, I'll marry you." They were married on Christmas Day in the small church in Sweetwater. The townspeople, who had once whispered behind Rebecca's back, now filled the pews to witness her happiness. Even Mr. Peterson, who had been so reluctant to rehire her at the school, offered his congratulations. Miguel stood as Jackson's best man, beaming with approval. Sarah, Jackson's sister, had traveled from Austin to stand with Rebecca, the two women having formed an immediate friendship when they met a week earlier. As Rebecca spoke her vows, she thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the humiliation of the auction block to the joy of being loved for herself. Jackson's voice was steady as he promised to cherish and protect her for all of his days. The reception was held at Whispering Pines, the ranch house decorated with evergreens and candlelight. As darkness fell, Jackson led Rebecca outside to show her his wedding gift, the foundation of their new home on the spot by the creek. "Construction will start in the spring," he told her. "Miguel's brother is a carpenter in San Antonio. He'll come to help." Rebecca leaned against him, watching the stars appear one by one. "I have a gift for you too," she said softly. "Oh." Jackson looked down at her curiously. Rebecca took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered. "In summer." Jackson's eyes widened, then filled with tears of joy. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down carefully. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Are you sure?" Rebecca nodded. "Doctor Wilson confirmed it last week when I went into town for supplies." Jackson knelt before her, pressing a gentle kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Your mama and I can't wait to meet you." The months that followed were filled with preparations for the baby and for their new home. Rebecca continued teaching until her condition became too obvious, then reluctantly took a leave of absence. To her surprise, the town council assured her that her position would be waiting when she was ready to return. The new house rose steadily through the spring, a spacious two-story structure with plenty of room for their growing family. Jackson insisted on a large study for Rebecca and bookshelves in every room. "Our children will be readers," he declared, "like their mother." In June, as wildflowers painted the hills in a riot of color, Rebecca went into labor. Dr. Wilson was summoned, and after 12 hours of effort, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Jackson's blue eyes and a thatch of dark hair. "What shall we call him?" Jackson asked, cradling his son with awe. "Robert," Rebecca suggested, "after my father." "Robert Alderman," Jackson tried the name. "It's perfect." They moved into their new home a month later once Rebecca had regained her strength. The house quickly became the heart of Whispering Pines, filled with laughter and love. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Emily, joined them 2 years after Robert, followed by twin boys, William and James, 3 years later. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Rebecca's financial acumen complementing Jackson's practical knowledge of cattle and land. Rebecca eventually returned to teaching part-time, and when the children were old enough, she established a small school on the ranch that served the children of neighboring ranchers as well as her own. On warm evenings, the family would gather on the wide porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jackson and Rebecca would sit close together, his arm around her shoulders, while their children played nearby. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and they had a moment alone, Jackson would remind Rebecca of the day they met, how she stood trembling on the auction block, and how he'd bid his entire savings without hesitation. "Best investment I ever made," he would tease, kissing the tip of her nose. And Rebecca would smile, thinking of the journey from that desperate day to this peaceful happiness. "Who would have thought," she would say, "that the worst day of my life would lead to the best?" On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson presented Rebecca with a special gift, a silver pendant crafted from ore taken from her father's mine. The Dawson gang's use of the mine had led to the discovery that it wasn't actually depleted as everyone had believed. There had been a narrow but rich vein that her father's workers had missed. Jackson had quietly purchased the mine from the bank that held its deed and had it properly surveyed. While not a bonanza, it produced enough silver to provide a comfortable additional income and to secure their children's futures. "Your father's dream wasn't wrong," Jackson told her as he fastened the pendant around her neck. "Just a little ahead of its time." Rebecca touched the pendant, feeling as if her father's spirit had somehow been vindicated. "He would have liked you," she said softly. "He always said to look for a man with vision and integrity." "I wish I could have met him," Jackson replied, "to thank him for raising the woman who made my life complete." As their children grew, Whispering Pines expanded. Jackson purchased adjacent land when it became available, and by their 15th anniversary, their modest ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the county. Robert, their eldest, showed a natural talent for ranching, riding alongside his father from an early age and absorbing everything Jackson could teach him. Emily inherited her mother's love of books and teaching, often helping in the ranch school. The twins, William and James, were still finding their paths, though both showed an aptitude for numbers that suggested they might handle the business side of ranching when they were older. Through it all, Jackson and Rebecca's love deepened and matured like fine wine. The passion of their early days evolved into a profound partnership based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering commitment. On the 20th anniversary of the day, Jackson had bought Rebecca's contract. They hosted a grand celebration at Whispering Pines. Friends and neighbors gathered to mark the occasion, many marveling at how a desperate act at a long-ago auction had blossomed into one of the great love stories of the county. As twilight fell and lanterns illuminated the ranch yard, Jackson pulled Rebecca away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. 20 years, he said, holding her close. Sometimes I still can't believe my luck. Rebecca smiled up at him, the years having only enhanced her beauty in his eyes. It wasn't luck, my love. It was courage, yours and mine, the courage to take a chance when everything seemed hopeless. I'd do it all again, Jackson assured her. Every moment from that first day to this one. As would I, Rebecca agreed, resting her head against his chest. Every step of our journey has been worth it. They stood together, watching the stars emerge above Whispering Pines, the home they'd built, the legacy they'd created, the love they'd nurtured through good times and bad. And in the gentle Texas night, surrounded by the fruits of their shared life, they knew with absolute certainty that their story, begun in desperation at an auction block, had become something rare and precious. A true and lasting love that had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. I love you, Rebecca Alderman, Jackson whispered against her hair. And I love you, Jackson Alderman, she replied. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come.